Well, welcome back to another Whiskey Wednesday with Binny's Beverage Depot. I'm Pat from the Whiskey Hotline, along with Brett and Joe. Our special guest today is Paul, founder of Few Spirits in Evanston, one of our local favorites. Paul, thank you for joining us. He is in a cabin in the woods right now. That's how much he wants to talk about whiskey with you guys, even when he's on vacation. So thank you, Paul.
Yeah, we love whiskey over here at Few Spirits, and even in the Michigan woods, you still love our whiskey up here.
What Few Spirits whiskey would pair best with a trip to the Michigan woods?
Oh, I would definitely have to say it's going to have to be that new rye Immortal. The Immortal Rye.
Immortal Rye.
Really nice herbal and spice, and I think it's got some really nice kind of fall or autumnal flavors, but I'm sure we'll be talking a little bit about that.
I would agree with that. This is a good rye for this time of year. So you guys are no strangers to kind of tweaking with things, whether it would be with botanicals or something else like that. We saw that really wonderful cold cut bourbon recently, which was proof down with some cold brew coffee. Joe's favorite gin, one of his favorite gins of all time, is the breakfast gin, the Few breakfast gin. So it doesn't surprise us that you found another interesting tea to work with. How much of Few's, as far as like distillers and blenders time, are you guys thinking about kind of non-traditional things like this now? I mean, you have great bourbon and rye that's won awards, but it seems like more often than not now, we're getting some pretty wild, out of left field stuff from Few, whether it be like the Rioja bourbon barrel aged stuff, something like that. What's kind of driving you with that? What's tickling your fancy with these things?
I think it's a couple things that really help drive it, but most of all, it's really just that urge and that drive to create and make. It's really always been the kind of DNA that we have at Few Spirits, is that creative process and trying to make new stuff. That's why we make whiskey, is to make new stuff. That's why we work at a distillery. If you wanted to make money, you would work at we work at Binny's.
What kind of
doing what
are you living in?
But no, I mean, it's all that stuff, and I think there's a lot of we do a lot of stuff, and some of the stuff that is particularly out there never gets released. We've got some, or it'll get released in a super small batch, or it gets released in a different format. But we're always trying new stuff because it's what keeps us involved.
How do you go about that? Because we were talking earlier about some of the things you've done sourcing ingredients, because you're not just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall. When you're doing these things, that's actually all the components that go in are extremely well thought out and aren't just things you can walk down the street to Whole Foods and get. So do you do everything with a mind to scaling, or do you do things small? I mean, you have the benefit of a distillery door where you can sell things, so that's got to be good, where you can lose things. But how do you do things small with the hopes that they blow up, or do you kind of just throw yourself in and go big before you know 100%?
Well, you kind of have to do it, at least try to do it at least a little bit smart. So the real answer is that it's both. We are anybody who's ever come, if you get us in a goofy mood, the amount of weird and wacky stuff we've done in the past will make the whiskey geek freak out. Like, we've done some really weird stuff that doesn't necessarily get released, or some things will get released that we don't really think are a true commercial product, but we think they're really neat, and
right.
We want to share it with the world. And other stuff, it probably is scalable. The cold cut and the Immortal Rye are both, I believe, pretty scalable products. Whereas like Joe's the coffee gin, that may not have been the most scalable product we've done, but it was really cool and it was really fun.
Was it good though?
But it was really good. Can you scale it? No. But can you get it to people that are going to go, okay, oh, that's really neat, I really enjoy that, that's got some cool flavors? Well, that's okay too. And I think that's one of the advantages of being Few Spirits, is we can do that. I don't need to sell 500,000 cases of a new gin in order for it to not be a Right now I'm working on a product that's going to be, it'll be released with about 300 cases for the world. Whereas even if no one's, not many people are going to get it, it'll be 2,000 bottles on the planet. That can be a very good success. Or, the other gin we talked about earlier with Joe, the breakfast gin, that was supposed to be a joke. But once we tasted the gin, it got really unfunny because it was really tasty.
That's my favorite gin. It's just
Or got funnier. So was
perfect,
Yeah.
Was that your biggest surprise then? I mean, obviously you're not doing any of these to fail. You're not saying, hey, I'm going to put this together because it's probably going to suck. I mean, that's obviously not the approach you're taking, but was that your biggest surprise, that you kind of did something a little bit as an inside joke that you had a massive amount of consumer appeal for? Was that,
Yeah,
that was the biggest?
Surprise. Yeah, that was, the breakfast gin was definitely a surprise. Like, we put it out for the giggles, and then we were getting, I don't remember, you might have been one of the people that called us and yelled at me that we weren't selling it to you.
Yes,
never does that.
I got like 5 or 6 calls from retailers and distributors yelling at me that you've got a breakfast gin and how come I don't have it? Do you not like me anymore? And we're like, no, it's supposed to be funny. We were trying to sell it to you. But sometimes it works, and you've certainly had, for every example of like the breakfast gin that's been a raging success, I can probably show you 10 different products that are perhaps a little bit less than successful. But when we do our experiments, I don't do an experiment trying to look at it from a commercial perspective. Right. I look at it from a perspective of, do I think this is cool? Will it be fun for me to make? And will it be fun for someone to drink, ideally more than once? Because those are all, if I'm having fun making it, I do believe people are going to have fun drinking it. And if I'm having fun drinking it, I do believe people will have fun drinking it other than us. And at the same time, it's tough to go out there and release a product that people just go, oh, I really wanted to try that thing from Pew. Take a sip. Okay, now I've tried it, and I'll move on.
Right. You quickly lose fans when you do that. You kind of lose fans really quickly.
Right. So
because you go from everything that everybody wants, everything you do, to, all right, it's fine.
Yeah. Oh, it's another one of Few Spirits weird shit. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it is a delicate balance of all of that, and there's always a balance too of, even I just did a media interview last week, and we're arranging the time with the journalist and to talk about our new product with the Immortal Rye, and he's like, oh, what else? Are you working on anything new? I'm like, well, we literally just scheduled this interview to talk about what we're doing that's new, and you're asking what else is new? I'm a little bit at a loss, but
It's kind of the craft beer thing, though. That's all people tend to want from breweries now is, what do you have new this week? And if there's nothing new, then they move on, and it's I don't think it translates that easily to spirits, though, because it's a lot, obviously we're talking about a bottle of booze is a significantly higher price point than, a can of beer or something. But I think that's also kind of why it's more impressive. I think that's why what makes kind of these experimental things more impressive is that they work. And like you mentioned earlier, like, do you want to drink it again? And I poured a small sample of this Immortal Rye, and I'm just supposed to be having a sip while I'm doing a tasting here. I find myself continually going back to it. It's just such a welcoming whiskey.
And it's different, and I think there's a lot of danger and a lot of opportunity in doing stuff like the Immortal Rye. But it's so integral to who we are as a company that we're not going to stop doing it. It may not, our products may or may not receive big national rollouts and all that, but we're not going to stop innovating and creating. It's who we are.
Well,
so go ahead. Well, I was just going to ask, so on this Immortal Rye, base premise here is, it's rye that is proof down with tea, and I'm not much of a tea nerd, but I'm told that this is a pretty hard to get tea, and I was in one of our stores down in Central Illinois last week, and somebody was like, "You don't understand. I used to work in a tea shop. This is like the Pappy Van Winkle of tea, and you can get it like at like 2 places once a year or some shit." So how did you end up with this tea paired with this particular whiskey? Oh, we lost Paul.
Uh-oh. Oh, there he is.
It's muted.
Sorry,
There he is.
I had an internet up in Michigan. Sorry, guys.
That's all right. So I was asking how you ended up with this particular tea with this rye, and I'm told that the tea is pretty hard to come by.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a mess up. We just had the cut. So I mean, last year we put out the cold brew bourbon, the cold cut, and won world's best at the World Whiskey Awards, won world's best at the Whiskeys of the World Awards, and people have started really getting into the cold cut.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're looking for what else we can do on this concept, and tea and rye seem natural. So we went out, and I don't remember exactly how many teas we tried, but I think it was like 15 different teas, and just did like a really, really, really rough blend just to kind of get, okay, how does this tea flavor play with the whiskey, and how does this tea flavor play with that, and try to narrow it down. And then once we had it narrowed down, we started working with different strengths. How strong of a tea do we want it? Do we want a hot tea? Do we want to do it with a cold tea? How are we going to do this so that all these flavors really pair in the way we want them to work? And we eventually kind of nailed it down, or narrowed it down to about 3 different teas. And once we had those 3, we did like a real, like a real version of it, not just like a rough cut, but like, this is a product, or this is a tasting that we would like to see. And the tea that we ended up using was just by far and away the most interesting. It kind of came down to the 8 Immortals tea that we do use, and a Lapsang Souchong, which is a really very heavily smoked tea if you're not a tea drinker. And that one was really interesting, but we didn't feel like it added to a conversation of whiskey. It didn't taste like an Islay Scotch, of course. I mean, it's totally different. But it was kind of in that universe. And we just kind of felt like if you want a smoky whiskey, everybody on this call can point to whatever their favorite is. You want Lagavulin, you want Ardbeg, what do you want for your smoky whiskey? This is neat and it's interesting, but the 8 Immortals is better. It didn't cover up some of the flavors of the rye whiskey. In fact, it really kind of enhanced them. So, few rye whiskey normally has these great kind of stone fruit flavors. Adding in the 8 Immortals tea really brings out tropical fruit flavors. Peach, honey, dragon fruit, mango, papaya, as well as this really nice backbone from the tea. And I don't want to say astringent because it's not really astringent, but it does have a little bit more of that tannic backbone from that tea.
So you were talking about different ways of experimentation. We had a question from Michael.
It adds to the conversation.
Yeah, totally. It adds to the conversation.
Yeah. How did you go about introducing the tea? What processes did you go through? Did you brew it first and add tea? Did you add the tea leaves and steep the bourbon? Sort of what did you go through in terms of the process to introduce the tea character?
So it's actually a really simple process. Instead of using water, we use cold brew tea. So we bring in tea leaves into the distillery, add them to water, and let them steep. It's cold water, not hot water. So we get a little more control, and I think the cold extraction brings out more of the fruit and less of the tannin, because that's what cold extracting tea does. And then instead of using water, we use that cold brewed tea to bring it down to proof. We use a relatively strong tea. I wouldn't drink this tea on its own because it's really pretty strong. The the tea cultivar I would drink on its own, and I have, and I will continue doing that. But the tea we use for this is a pretty strong tea. That probably a little intense for the actual tea consumption.
Strong, more tea to water than a standard cup of tea, you're saying?
Like my iced tea
Correct.
that
Yeah,
I
it's a
make every
relatively
day.
Yeah.
could be,
Brett's a fan of strong
and
tea.
it works. Again, the proof is always in the pudding.
Yeah. I really, I like how you mentioned that.
Marrying? Do you have to spend an extra time marrying the tea and the whiskey? Did those sit for a while together? Or is it all just pretty?
All of our proofing is very slow. We're very cognizant of the benefits of very, very slow proofing. So it's no different for the Immortal Rye versus our normal rye in that time frame. We're usually looking at about a month to proof down.
Wow.
So very, very, very slow. Not as slow as like some of the Cognac guys or the Armagnac guys in France, but we do proof very slow just as a general process. And certainly it's still true for the Immortals. Although, of course, we have the extra step of having to make the tea. So I guess it's a little bit slower than normal, but not much.
A month. I don't know that, I mean, I always know it's slow and there's, a lot of benefits to slowly introducing water to a finished and aged distilled spirit, but I never heard of a month. I know of a couple of distilleries that take maybe a couple of days or something and it slowly drips into a tank, but that's a lot of space and a lot of time commitment for this.
Yeah, you need to avoid saponification. So, I mean, that's the whole part of that reason.
Wow.
So everything doesn't taste like soap.
Yep.
I really like how you pointed out the fruit in this, Paul. That was the first thing I got. I was like, wow, this is like peach tea flavored rye whiskey. But it's like calling it a flavored whiskey is kind of a misnomer. And I think it misrepresents what it is because this is still whiskey, and it's like, and it's important that it's not like, oh, tea flavor. You think tea flavored whiskey, you think that, that brief 18-month period 10 years ago when like those sweet tea vodkas were all the rage, it's not that at all. And it's very much a compliment to the native kind of herbaceous and doughy and fruit character of this rye. It's pretty cool. Bud Light Rita. Yeah, no, Michael, it's not Bud Light Rita.
I hate talking about stuff that's about what it's not. I always like talking about like what it is, but I do think it's important. There is no sugar added here. There's no chemicals. There's no flavorants. It's not really a flavored whiskey, even though I know damn well that's what everybody's going to call it. It's not. It's 93 proof. It's not a 60, 70 proof liqueur.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's just whiskey and tea, and it's much simpler than I think a lot of people really want it to be. They want it to be this intricate process where with the beakers, and there is that, but we're not mad scientists. We're just whiskey drinkers.
What did TTB give you a cola for?
So legally it's a DSS, so distilled spirit
I figured it had to be when you do that. It had to be DSS, right? I mean, that's ultimately what you're going to end up with.
Yeah, it really has to be. I mean, I think we could get it under a flavored whiskey category legally, but it's not. It's legally a DSS. Yeah. It's 93 proof. It's just like a cold cut. The cold cut is also a DSS. But everybody calls it flavored whiskey.
But people shouldn't care, right? I mean, the only difference it makes is how prominent you're allowed to use rye, correct? I mean, that's when you get that different variance, the DSS only makes a difference about how prominent you are to make rye. Because don't you have to limit like proportional character size and stuff like that? And that's as big as it is normally.
And they also get you on the use of the W word anywhere outside of the class and type. So right on the front where it says rye whiskey, we can use the W word. But I don't believe we use the W word on the back label as Pat's reading over it, trying to bust me.
Well, no, I mean, it kind of points out the fact that amongst other things,
don't use whiskey on the back label. It's funny.
Every once in a while we address political issues, and one of them being is that the labels are approved by people who don't know anything about spirits.
Yeah.
And so you know, and maybe the category definitions could be changed a little bit, you know, to allow innovation, because otherwise, go ahead.
They actually do a pretty decent job. And, you know, earlier this summer, they made their first changes to class and type since I believe it was 64. And last week they announced they're going to make some more changes coming up too. So they're driving me up the wall right now with the cola that I'm filing on a different product. It's just a simple barrel finish, but they're driving me up the wall with their rejections. This is not a complex issue, and they're making it super complex. And but
well, I think that's the
overall,
balance.
I think
How do you?
out.
I mean, you need to have, because there is a reason. You would hope that the main purpose they serve when they're codifying these things is to have another level of government quality control. I mean, there are certain standards you have to meet. So people, if they buy something that says that, people can expect they're going to get a certain quality level. And that's good until the point in time where it basically stifles innovation. And it sounds like the arguments that we've moved to now are more about what needs to be changed to not stifle innovation, yet to maintain a minimum quality level.
So, you know, the cola that we're discussing is a bourbon whiskey finished in a vermouth barrel. And they're having fits over calling a bourbon whiskey finished in a vermouth barrel exactly what it is.
Did you call High West? Because they've been using...
Other people have done this. What's the holdup?
Yeah, it's a bourbon finished in port barrels too.
Yeah, we've got that in the warehouse, but you know, what's the holdup? I don't know. They're having an issue with the label, and it's been now I think 6 weeks, and I just don't understand why it's a problem.
Well, when you get the label approval, we're signed up for it, right?
It's all pre-sold. It's all pre-sold to Whiskey Club.
Do you have another vermouth barrel laying around?
However, if you're interested in do that, turns out we do.
There you go.
Their lucky day.
Yeah, you should. I should get you guys up to the distillery and show you some of our collections. I've got some books of poetry I think you guys might like.
Yeah, how is that going, since you've gone through a lot of transition in the last couple of years in terms of moving things around? Obviously it's going well. Like in terms of moving production and warehousing.
Things are generally going pretty good. Yeah, warehousing solid. We've done some changes. And obviously COVID isn't exactly helping any of our best laid plans. But we're hanging in, and you know, we're continuing to do what we do, which is make great whiskey and have some fun doing it. But
how sustainable is this Immortal Rye going to be going forward if this tea is hard to get?
So our plan is that it's perfectly, it's always available. And I think that what we're looking at is primarily just a short-term supply interruption. But like we were saying before we went on camera, that once we released this Immortal Rye and we started talking about what tea we use, all the whiskey drinkers out there in the world went out and bought up all the tea from our vendor. So now we don't have any more tea available for us. But it is currently on the water heading over here from China. And you know, the tea vendors, of course, are thrilled. They're like, "Oh my God, we thought we were going to sell this much tea this year. We sold this much tea." And so now we're kind of working with them to help get, help give them some more insight into our needs, because they don't want to, they want to sell us tea, obviously.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and tea is also, tea isn't something, it's not like making vodka or whatever. It's not like you just started to turn on a spigot and it comes. There's what's the lead for this particular tea? What is the lead, the curing time, harvest curing time, so on and so forth, to actually create the tea?
I don't have a straight answer for that because I'm not really a tea guy, but it's a partially fermented black oolong. So your point is, of course, correct, that it's not you don't just go into the pantry and grab more tea. You got to
Right.
grow it. And for this one, it only grows in a particular area. I'm probably going to slaughter the pronunciation, and I don't mean to, but the Guangdong province. Somebody who speaks Chinese could probably do a lot better justice to that than I can. So if I sound racist, I apologize. I can't say it. And it only grows like between like 1,800 and 2,200 feet elevation or something like that. So it's this really weird, esoteric tea leaf that is partially fermented, and it's all hand fluffed, which as a non-tea guy, I can't really tell you what a hand fluffing means. Although I've heard about fluffers before, but I don't think it's the same thing. So I hope it's not. But it's not the easiest thing, and sometimes we step in things that we didn't mean to step in. But here we sit.
Well, all right. So plans going forward then, at least. Where's this going to go? So this whole idea of proofing things down with these other liquids, I mean, do you already have other ideas spinning around on the same concept that you think are going to come to fruition down the line?
We've worked with a bunch of different ideas. We've struggled to really find other liquids that we think work as well as coffee and tea.
No single malt proof down with Tang or something?
Yeah, we've played around with it, and honestly, one of the early ones we did was apple juice, because what's more American than apple juice? But it wasn't
like
balanced.
A pre-mixed stone fence at that point.
Exactly, which is basically the idea, right?
Pomona Evanston.
It was good. It wasn't. It didn't capture our fancy the same way the coffee and tea have.
Right.
I could certainly predict that there may be other coffees that we work with, different cultivars or different origins, and I can predict using different teas. But as far as other liquids, we're always looking.
We have a request for Michael. We have a request from Michael for a green tea and gin.
So the green tea that we did for the trying with the Immortals.
No.
We liked it. I personally enjoy drinking green tea. We like this better. And again, never say never. Will we ever work with green tea? Maybe.
It's got to be tougher because everything about green tea is almost more of a feel. It's like an umami rather than a conventional flavor, right? I mean, it's certainly not intense. It's more of a feel in a sense,
It didn't work as well with the kind of like that big get up and go whiskey. We tried Assam, we tried Pu'er. The Pu'ers are pretty interesting. There's some cool stuff with Pu'er. Like I said, Lapsang Souchong was really cool. We're always interested in trying to figure out cool stuff and go where it goes.
Cool.
Excellent.
All right. Well, Paul, thanks for talking this one over. That's an awesome whiskey. I think. Do you have a particular cocktail that you guys are kind of honing in a use for this for?
I think we're still working on it. I'm always a big fan of the classics. I'm a big Boulevardier drinker, although I think this with the Boulevardier might be a little much because you already get that big, strong backbone from the Italian bitter, and the sweetness of the vermouth might be it might tend to drown out a little bit. But Manhattan's, the classics.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get something out there. We've got a pretty decently sized ambassador team, and if the on-premise world ever does come back, which I hope it will. I mean, now we're at 40% Chicago, of course. And
Well, and 1 o'clock, and I think for a lot of places, and more important for them, last call at 1 or last drink at 1 rather than 11. I think that's going to be helpful.
That's a big deal. I mean, so I think that once you start getting bartenders back to work, I think we're going to see some really cool stuff coming out with it.
Oh,
because
yeah.
it is different, and it's not just, oh, here's another rye whiskey. There's something more to it that a drinker can engage with, and it's freaking delicious, which is what actually matters at the end of the day. What's in the glass? Joe's sitting there with his glass. What's in the glass? Is it something you want to put in there?
Right.
You're going to come back to it. It's
really
whiskey is academic, but it's also physical and emotional.
100%. And you said it exactly right. You never want to get to the point. There's a fine line between doing things that people get excited about and going so far that it's just one more thing that you threw out there. You don't really want to get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to bottle whiskey inside of a roadkill squirrel carcass like some beer guys have done.
Well, we had that conversation
I just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Amaro Manhattan with all few products is recommended by Bob. Michael had said that he played around with black tea and lemon peel simple syrup for whiskeys. I would go on that too. I think this and some kind of version of a whiskey sour with some lemon juice and maybe something that gives it a little more lift, like a simple syrup. I make a honey simple syrup that I make a lot of cocktails out of, and I could see that kind of honey syrup and lemon, and then this tea component with that rye, it would be pretty good.
Well, but dry instead of acid. So dry it, you get the same effect, but you dry it out instead of using acid.
Mm-hmm. Yep. As the other interesting thing is, and I learned this later, so the traditional serve of this tea in China is in a group. And so you sit around with your friends and you brew a pot of tea in the middle, and so there's a pot of tea in the middle, and everybody gets these little tiny, for lack of a better word, shot glasses. They look like a copita. So everybody knows what a copita is. It looks just like a copita. And you take turns pouring off these little quarter-ounce, half-ounce pours of the tea, and everybody drinks the tea out of these copitas. And it's a serving ritual that's rather similar to a group of friends sitting around sharing little pours of whiskey.
Yeah.
And that's a coincidence. I'd love to say that I'm that clever, but I'm not. But the serving ritual is very similar.
That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, no, that's better. Yeah, well, and you probably
enjoy it with friends. That's how it's meant to be enjoyed, right?
Exactly.
Well, Paul, thanks again. If anybody has any other questions for Paul or questions for us about whiskey, email us at spirits@binnies.com. We'll get them answered for you.
Yep.
And we'll be back next week. We're doing more Mezcal stuff next week because that's the rest of my Mondays until I retire now, apparently. And we'll also be back next Wednesday. Who do we have next Wednesday? Oh, we have Horse Soldier Bourbon and Horse Soldier Whiskey next Wednesday, which is a pretty cool story. And
yeah, we're talking to Scotty. We're talking to one of the soldiers that was on the
Scott
ground.
Neal.
Yeah, on horseback early in our invasion of Afghanistan.
All right, everyone. Well, Paul, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time. I know you're up in the woods. Everybody else, cheers.
Thanks, Joe.
Immortal Rye. It is
Paul.
so awesome.
Good to see you guys. Go Cubs.
Good, Paul.
All right, go White
Enjoy the
Sox.
Northwoods.
We'll see you.
Cheers. Bye.
Go Sox.
Cheers, everyone. Have a good one.